Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome back to Miss Macio's Crazy Wacky History Channel. Anyway, we're moving on to Chapter 7. And so in Chapter 7, we are going to talk largely about the beginnings of the country. So the first several, first decade or two. We're going to talk heavily about the 1790s in this particular section. Alrighty, and just a key that could be helpful in your test. We'll see. Alright, this is going to be the Goddess of Liberty, and she is holding an American flag. There's a monument there memorializing President Washington, George Washington, and you have a small black boy dressed in Native American garb. You have the Niagara Falls in the background, which is obviously an iconic American landmark. And then in the bottom of the falls, you have the native hunters. So basically, this is an image that kind of represents all that is significant in the United States. You still have an unspoiled national landscape, a very diverse population, a national flag, all of these kinds of things. And the Goddess of Liberty is kind of a unique symbol to us. These are symbols of America in 1800. And you can imagine how many of these would no longer be appropriate in the year 2018. Obviously, we would not use little slave boys dressed as natives or natives down there hunting or anything like that anymore. So, anyway, just an interesting image to start this off. Alrighty. So, in the 1790s, so we have started a new constitution, so we're going to need a new president, obviously. So Washington is going to receive the highest number of votes from the Electoral College, which is set up in the Constitution, and he is elected president in 1788, becoming our first president. John Adams was elected vice president, and the way they elected vice president is the person with the second most votes. Can you imagine them doing that today? Can you imagine Hillary Clinton being Donald Trump's vice president? Talk about an interesting world that would have been. So, Washington is going to insist only the president has the right to remove appointed government officials. That is going to be something he insists on. He is there during the constitutional conventions. He helps write the Constitution. And I think he feels like he has the right to say that. So he is going to set up a cabinet. And again, this is not something in the Constitution. This is something he feels like he has the ability to do as the president of the United States. I figure out where he's president. Anyway, so his first cabinet is going to have 4 men. You can have head of the Department of State. That's going to be Thomas Jefferson. Department of State is going to be all of the foreign affairs. And Thomas Jefferson will not serve the duration of Washington's presidency. Alexander Hamilton, who is going to be the head of the Treasury Department, so he'll be the Secretary of the Treasury. You have Henry Knox, who will be the Secretary of War, and Attorney General Edmund Randolph. And the Attorney General is going to be responsible for government stuff. All right. The judiciary... law stuff, yeah. Attorney General, lawyer. All right, Judiciary Act of 1789 is going to establish a federal district court in each state with 3 circuit courts to hear appeals. The Supreme Court is going to have final judicial say. So the only court set up via the Constitution is going to be the Supreme Court. In the Constitution, it does not tell you how many justices are required to preside on the Supreme Court. It just basically says there needs to be a leader. And our first Supreme Court justice is going to be John Jay. All right. Congress is kind of tasked with setting up any other court systems, and they have done that over the years. 1791, they add the Bill of Rights. So this is going to be after Washington becomes president. It was one of the conditions of all the states ratifying the Constitution, the last several ones wanting a Bill of Rights. Madison, who's now a member of Congress, he's going to submit 19 amendments. They will work through those amendments. They will adjust them. Some of them, they'll smush them together. Some of them will actually be kind of utilized later. And 10 of them are going to get approved by 1791. So this will be our first Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. And this is going to be there to protect individual citizens against an oppressive national government. People were very concerned that the same thing would happen to them again as what had happened prior to the American Revolution. And they really don't want that. So they're doing everything they can to prevent that. Okay. So Alexander Hamilton becomes our Secretary of the Treasury. So he's kind of tasked with figuring out the money problem. All right. January of 1790. We're going to have a redemption and assumption. So this is very controversial because it's going to create a permanent national debt. Alexander Hamilton believes that you need that because he thinks that's what's going to set us up as a contender in the worldwide market, basically. He suggests that Congress redeem at face value the $55 million in Confederation securities held by foreign and domestic investors to create good credit. He says this policy would unfairly increase the profits. Critics, I'm sorry, not he. Critics said this policy is going to unfairly increase the profits of speculators. Hamilton wants to improve public credit by having the national government assume the war debt of the states. So he wants to take all the debts from the states, compile them, and make it one debt for the national government. December of 1790. He's going to argue, Hamilton that is going to argue that a national bank would be jointly owned by private stockholders and the national government. The bank's going to make loans to merchants. It's going to handle government funds and issue bills of credit. Jefferson and Madison oppose a national bank, but they prefer a strict interpretation of the Constitution. So if it's not there, we can't do it. No, don't read between the lines kind of thing. And so they're going to oppose this national bank, both Jefferson and Madison, because they don't think the government has the power to create it because it's not in the Constitution. Hamilton's report on manufactures in December of 1791 is going to urge the expansion of American manufacturing. It's going to call for Congress to impose excise taxes to pay the interest on the national debt, and it's going to advocate moderate revenue tariffs and not protective tariffs. So, a protective tariff is going to be one that is levied on imports of goods that are manufactured in the United States. So they would charge more money for the imports, basically. All right, so you can see here, this is Hamilton's system of public credit. So the national war debt, 42.4, I think this is in millions, yeah. Plus the war debts assumed from the states, 21.5 and 11.7 owed to foreigners. So $75.6 million in bonds is basically mostly sold to the wealthy, and this is going to create a permanent national debt. So bondholders will get interest on this debt, basically. They have about $5.6 million gross revenue every year through customs and excise taxes and whatnot. And so it will not balance out. All right. All right. Jefferson. So Jefferson is a farmer. All right. By 1793, the Federalists have split over Hamilton's financial plans for the nation. So Southern Federalists are going to support Jefferson and Madison, and they're going to end up being called the Democratic Republicans or simply the Republicans. And we're going to watch John Adams, the miniseries, and watch a couple of episodes of that, and they will talk about this. Northerners are going to support Hamilton and the Federalists. And so Jefferson is going to be considered a Southerner. He is from Virginia. And he's going to argue that wage labor of the North cannot sustain a Republican nation. So he's going to focus instead on Yemen farmers and their family, whose work, he argued, could support the nation as well as European countries. So Jefferson is such a farmer. He believes that is the future of the nation, is farming. The French Revolution is going to kind of disrupt everything. European farming is going to lend credibility, or the disruption of European farming is going to lend credibility to Jefferson's ideas. So basically, while the French Revolution is going on, their fields are torn up. There's nobody there to do the farming and whatnot. So they will import a lot of goods from the United States. And so Jefferson's like, see, this is how we're going to make money. We're going to be an agrarian nation. So can you imagine if we were a completely agrarian nation? Today, those are considered third world countries. So, all right. Americans are going to make a lot of profits from the French Revolution, but they argue over the ideologies that lead to the revolution. So basically, the French Revolution is kind of based off of what happens with the American Revolution. They kind of see, oh, they overthrew their oppressive or tyrannical monarch. We can do the same. And so the kind of common man will basically go around killing the nobles. They will win the revolution and overthrow their government in France. So that's going to be a big and bloody revolution. They will behead nobility. They will put them on stakes and parade them around town. Madame Tussauds in the wax, the wax museum that's there today. But anyway, Madame Tussauds lived during that time period. And she will end up kind of being forced to make wax heads of the nobles that have been beheaded by using their actual heads. So, yeah, it's pretty bloody. It's pretty tragic. They will overthrow their king. They will put him on trial. It's a pretty fake trial. He is found, of course, guilty, and he is, I think he is beheaded. And then his wife, Marie, is also going to be beheaded. So, yeah, terrible, terrible. All right, so let's go back to Americans. So some of the Americans are going to support the Jacobin ideas of social egalitarian or a democratic society. Americans with strong Christian beliefs don't like this because they're closing the churches, and they fear a similar social rebellion occurring in the United States. Other Americans are very critical of the revolution's bloodshed, because even though we had a revolution, the bloodshed is nowhere near the same. And we aren't just going around killing nobility. We are basically fighting for our freedom against a country. So even though it's called the French Revolution, I do kind of think it's more of a civil war between the have and the have-nots, but that's my personal opinion. All right, 1794, Western Pennsylvania farmers. You're going to mount the Whiskey Rebellion. So Hamilton, one of the ways he decides to raise money is taxes, obviously, and so he's going to put an excise tax on alcohol. So he's going to charge basically a tax on alcohol. Wheat farmers in the Pennsylvania area are going to be distilling and making whiskey, because that is a lot easier to carry and sell than sheaves of wheat are. And so there's going to be several of the men who are going to kind of create a rebellion. Washington will send out the militia. And what's unique about this is Washington will go with them. So he is the only president ever to kind of go out to some sort of active battle. By the time they get there, most of the guys have kind of dispersed, and they will end up killing about 4 of the farmers. So, all right, Jay's treaty. So Jay is going to be John Jay, who is the Supreme Court Justice, the head justice. Chief Justice, that's the word. You have a lot of disagreements between the British and the Americans over shipments to France. They don't want us shipping to France. That's their enemy. Technically, we kind of are too at this point. But so we make a treaty in 1793-94 called Jay's Treaty. We accept Britain's right to stop neutral ships. In return, we could make claims to the British for illegal seizures and require the British to move their troops and Indian agents from the Northwest Territory. They do not actually move their agents from the Northwest Territory. It's really a very pro-British treaty. And it's kind of an embarrassment for Adams's, for Washington's presidency there. It's not really successful. And it's basically just signed to kind of save face. All right. In the Caribbean area, Saint-Domingue is a French plantation colony in the West Indies. Elite planters rule a population of 40,000 free whites. Some 28,000 free blacks were excluded from white privileges, though. And you have 500,000 black slaves working the sugar plantations. French Revolution is going to intensify conflicts on the island and inspire a massive slave uprising that aims to abolish slavery. Toussaint Louverture, he seizes control of the country and in 1803 proclaims the independent nation of Haiti. This is the Atlantic world's first black republic, and it is a successful rebellion. Haitian refugees are going to flood into the United States, and this is going to make American slaveholders super uneasy. They do not want this kind of spreading. They don't want the Haitians kind of sharing this revolution with slaves here, because they certainly do not want a slave uprising to have to deal with. So, the Haitian Revolution, 1791, it ends by 1804. Okay. Many Americans are going to believe in organized political parties, that they are dangerous. That is going to include George Washington. When George Washington leaves office after 2 terms, he writes a kind of a, what do we call it? All that my head is saying right now is goodbye address, but anyway, it's a letter he writes to the American people when he ends his presidency, when he decides to not run for any more terms. And he writes it, and it's published in newspapers across the country. And it's pretty wordy. It's kind of like a father telling his kid what to do based off of his experience. But the main things that you really should pull out of that is the fact that George Washington warns a future countrymen to stay away from political parties, not to divide themselves into political parties, and to stay out of foreign affairs. As you can imagine, we did not listen at all. You actually get your first political parties with Jefferson's election in 1800, which we'll talk about in just a second. Let's talk about Adams first, though. The 1796 election, you have the 2 groups that are kind of debating over Hamilton's policies, and these are going to be the things that are going to start to divide people. They're holding public festivals and processions to celebrate their prospective candidates. Adams is elected president, and Jefferson becomes his vice president, right? Yes. All right. You have maritime disputes with the French erupting into the XYZ affair. Okay, so basically what happens is we are having this kind of undeclared war with the French out in the ocean. They're attacking our ships. We're fighting back, yada, yada, yada. So Adams is going to send some diplomats to France to talk about kind of how we can solve this problem. When they get to France, you have French that come in and basically try to bribe the Americans before they will allow them to go into France and have these conversations. The Americans decide not to do that, and they turn around and they go back home. When Adams writes about it to Congress, he will refer to the 3 men in France as Mr. X, Mr. Y, and Mr. Z, and that's why it's called the XYZ affair. All right. And eventually France will realize that that was kind of silly, that they shouldn't have done that, and we will improve our relations. All right. During Adams' presidency, he passes several acts, or allows several acts to be passed, that are going to take a very hard line against the Republican critics. So they passed the Naturalization Act. So originally the term that you had to live here was 5 years. The Naturalization Act under Adams is going to extend it to 14 years. The Alien Act is going to authorize the deportation of foreigners. The Sedition Act is going to prohibit publication of insults or attacks on presidents or members of Congress. So it is going to very much limit individual rights. It's going to threaten that party system. Federalist prosecutors are going to arrest many Republican newspaper editors and politicians. They're going to put some of them in jail. And this is going to be a huge constitutional crisis, which is going to lead to the Kentucky and Virginia legislatures declaring the Alien and Sedition Acts to be unauthoritative, void, and of no force. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions are going to set forth a states' right interpretation of the Constitution, asserting that the states had a right to judge the legitimacy of national laws. That is going to come up again as we approach the Civil War. It will be called nullification. South Carolina will nullify certain laws that they disagree with, but that'll happen a little later on. Okay, so the presidential election of 1800 is going to be considered the Revolution of 1800. So John Adams is a Federalist. Thomas Jefferson is going to be considered a Democratic Republican. And so this will be our first kind of official election between two different political parties. We have yet to pass the 12th Amendment. So you will get, let's see, Federalists are going to attack Jefferson as an irresponsible radical. The election is contested, but Federalist Hamilton supported Jefferson, leading in a new Republican era. So Jefferson is running against Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr is the Federalist candidate. Jefferson is the Democratic Republican candidate. And they're a tied race. They will go into Congress for that race to be determined. And they will determine that Hamilton will throw his support to Jefferson, which is interesting because they'd had all this kind of problems during President Washington's term. But he'll throw his support to Jefferson, and this will get Jefferson the win in 1800. And at this point in time, the person with the second most votes became vice president. So Aaron Burr becomes vice president, and Aaron Burr never succeeds to the presidency. But this is something he will hold a grudge for a long time against Hamilton, and he will eventually challenge Hamilton to a duel, and he will kill him. So anyway, the reason we call it a revolution is because we're going to go from Federalist Adams to Republican era under Jefferson. It is a bloodless transfer of power, showing that popularly elected governments could be changed in an orderly way, even in times of bitter partisan conflict. So that is one thing we definitely have a history of, is kind of moving from one political party to another when it's time to transfer the power for the presidency. So here's some visuals. It's the election of 1796. So John Adams, the Federalist, Thomas Jefferson, the Democratic Republican, 71 to 68. So John Adams becomes the president. Thomas Jefferson becomes the vice president. All right. In 1800, Thomas Jefferson, Aaron Burr, you're going to have 5 candidates. This is another thing that will start to change. But you've got Thomas Jefferson, Aaron Burr, John Adams, C.C. Pinckney, and John Jay. So you've got 2 Republicans against 3 Federalists. I guess fortunately for this transfer of power, both the top 2 vote getters are both of the same political party. John Adams was a Federalist, though, so when Jefferson becomes the president, it will be the bloodless transfer of power from Federalist to Republican, or Democratic Republican is how they'll often refer to it. But you can see Thomas Jefferson, Aaron Burr, it's a tie. Hamilton is the tie-breaking vote. Aaron Burr holds a grudge. So that is all I have for this section. So that was a little lengthy. Sorry about that. The next one should be shorter. Hope you have a good morning, afternoon, or evening. Bye.